This is House Planning Help, episode 131. Hi there, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Currently struggling from one of those myself, looking for land, but I still hope to build an energy efficient home one day. And in this session, my guest is Robert Young. It's going to be another case study, and I find these really useful. I hope you do too. Always get in touch, let me know how these ones are going down. This one is building a home for your retirement in the garden. Perhaps it's an option. Maybe it's one you haven't considered. You could downsize and get exactly what you want at the same time. It's a busy time of year for me. It's always the way. We're going to talk about the UK Passive House Awards in a moment. However, I've also been hosting an event. This is not something I've done for a little while. I used to do it a lot in my radio days, but really fun, particularly when it's on all sorts of things that I'm interested in construction. And this was the launch of a construction management course at the local university. And it took place at BRE. We had some pretty significant people coming along and doing a talk to the crowd there. For example, representatives from Skanska, Balfour, BT, the Chartered Institute of Building, and so on. Largely, it was focusing on the skills gap and the fact that how do we respond to that in industry? How do we make sure we bridge this gap? And as we went along as well, what was interesting in a lot of these presentations that were given were that it tended to come back to what's going to happen in the future. Where are we going? What might change? Whether it's artificial intelligence, will robots finally take over the world? They've said it for decades, but I suppose we're getting closer to that eventuality. The other thing that many other industries, if you take the taxi services, for example, Uber came along and just completely changed that, and no one saw it coming at all. Airbnb for the hotel world. And really in construction, we haven't seen much disruption. I keep hoping it will happen in terms of driving up quality, but I can't quite see where it's coming from yet. However, it's bound to revolve around data, around the internet, around mobile. I'm pretty confident about that, as I'm sure most people are. We just haven't got there yet. It's probably going to come from a strong leader who can just see something that others can't, and then it's going to rapidly move on from there. So really interesting. Oh, one more thing. One point that came out was the importance of ongoing training. And I think that, although obvious, is one of those things that if you think you know it all, that's exactly when things start to go wrong. So let's get to our interview then with Robert Young. And this came about because my production company, Regen Media, is producing video inserts for the UK Passive House Awards. We've done this for the last few years. And this is a project that I actually do myself. I can't do everything these days, but I like doing this one because I get to see loads of brilliant houses, which is, of course, exactly what I enjoy doing. And as we travel around the country, I'll try and bring you a few more of these interviews if I get the opportunity. It's just a lot to do with the time that I get to spend there and whether I can dig out the microphone. And I'm pleased to say I did that with Robert. So his new house was going to be in the garden of the old house. And that's actually how we start today, with an overview of the old house.
Well, the old house is an early Victorian, large house, which was originally the infirmary for Swatham's workhouse. And it was extended and made into a private house about the beginning of the 20th century.
And as a house, I think you've already told me you've had many happy memories there.
Yes, we have indeed. We came to the house in 1984. It was semi-derelict at the time. We had a lot of work done to it, but it was a lovely house to live in. Big, spacious rooms, or should I say wards, sash windows, lovely floorboards, a real treat. And of course, an Aga in the kitchen too. The children loved the large garden, and we all benefited from it. It was a very, very nice place to live.
This large garden, well, a part of it was eventually going to end up as your new home. However, I'm interested in another aspect, that you sold a portion of your land to a builder. So how did that come about, and why did you go down that path? How did it all evolve?
The southern end of our garden was surrounded by trees, and it wasn't very well used by us, really. But a local builder came and he bought an old farmhouse which was adjacent, immediately demolished it and planned to build 4 houses on the plot. The end of our garden would have made a 5th, and he approached us and said that to us, would we like to sell? And after a bit of discussion, we thought it was quite a reasonable thing to do. We could never have had access from that plot or to it, whereas, of course, with it crossing his land, it was useful to him. So that went ahead. It didn't reduce the nature of our garden significantly, which was still about 3/4 of an acre.
I'm quite interested that as a self-builder, one of the routes I realise that's very popular is to approach people who might have a garden of a reasonable size. So are there any tips for me if I try and knock on your door, if you're back in that house there, what do I need to do?
Well, you need to offer me some money, I suppose. And it has to be something that's worthwhile from our point of view, not just financially. I wouldn't have wanted this to spoil the nature of our house, which we'd lived in for nearly 30 years at the time, and was a really nice place to live. So, for example, we wouldn't have been interested had it been a 2-storey building. The fact that he was planning to build sophisticated bungalows made it more interesting. But obviously, ultimately, we are looking for a price that we can agree on within those specifications of the type of building.
How did you set that price? Did you get any advice yourself on how you do that?
Yes, we did. We spoke to an agent who came round and looked at the site and gave us some indication of what was reasonable. We didn't get the best price because, of course, it was land that we could never have developed. So obviously we had to accept that there were factors there which were going to reduce the income we received.
And that's another reason that you wouldn't immediately think, oh, well, I'll put that on the market because it was only useful to him.
Yes, it would never have crossed our mind to put it onto the market, ever. It was the fact that we were approached at the time that caused us to consider it.
And then to the house that we're sitting in now, this was obviously part of your garden. At what stage did you start thinking the old house was not where you wanted to be for the next few years?
Let's say when I turned 70. We were getting older. We still had a sizable garden. We had a big house that, being old, required regular maintenance. It was costly to heat. It was costly in many ways. And the appeal of a smaller building suddenly began to become important. I've always thought in life you should do things before you have to. And I think we were trying to prepare ourselves for a time when we're not as mobile or as agile as we hopefully still are.
What were the first steps?
Well, the first step was to acknowledge that we wanted to do that. And then we didn't do anything with it for a while. But I did go to a meeting in Swaffham, organised by the local Rotarians, on architecture. And I've always had an interest in architecture. This was about domestic architecture, and in 2 parts: the vernacular in the past and future developments. And Chris Parsons spoke about the future. And he spoke about the future as a passive house future, which was extremely interesting. And I became a convert almost straight away. It seemed to me such a good idea that we could live so comfortably and relatively cheaply in this kind of house and recognise the green credentials that were important to us.
Jane wasn't at this meeting, was she? So did she take some convincing?
She did. She comes from a family who do feel the cold greatly. And she couldn't quite get her head round at first the idea that we wouldn't be cold, or that we wouldn't be able to turn the heating on and boost the heat to keep us warm in the winter. And so we did have to investigate a bit further. And I think, like many people who've taken this route, it led us to Denbydale and to a passive house there, which I think is famous. And we were very, very impressed by what we saw and what we heard. And even Jane, on a cold November day, found it surprising that in a room with 10 people, we had to open a window.
It's funny, actually, you mentioned Denby Dale, and I think even in the last podcast, that was the inspiration, or at that stage, it was the one research project that everyone had access to. So let's move on. How do you segment your garden so that one is your old house, that plot there, and this is the new one? Is that a relatively straightforward process?
It was, because there was a Norfolk red brick wall dividing what had been the old area, and we were able to just simply add a small extension to that to make a very neat plot. The only slight downside was that we wanted to share access with the old house, and that wasn't possible according to the Highways Authority. So we've had to find a different access to this plot, and that has been a little bit difficult, but it's something we've overcome, and it's not now an issue.
In terms of the plot itself, I know that there was one tree which was particularly distinctive and important. So tell me about this. Did you know about it to begin with as well?
Oh yes, this area was a wooded area. There were a number of conifers. There were at first a couple of ash trees, as well as the lime tree that we still have. One of the ash trees came down in a storm. The other ash tree we had removed in case it came down in another storm, which made the lime much more dominant on the landscape. It's a beautiful tree. We liked it when we were in the old house, and we still like it in the new house, even though, of course, we're a lot closer to it.
And it's just a tree preservation order that's on it?
It is, yeah. I'm not totally sure I would have removed it, even if there hadn't been a tree preservation order. We haven't been here a year yet, so we haven't felt the full effect of what comes down from the tree. Certainly we've had a lot of leaves in the autumn. We were prepared for that, but we have had a lot of seed covers that have come down recently, which were a surprise to us really, and did cause a bit more work, but they're minimal, and the tree is very effective in giving us shade in the summer when we don't want to be overheated in a passive house.
You've talked about above the ground, but of course a tree, particularly such a sizable tree, has lots of roots below ground. How do you know where those roots are, whether it's going to cause a problem? What sort of research needs to take place?
Well, we did have a dendrologist, I think. Is a dendrologist?
What? That's a new one.
Well, someone who came and plotted all the trees, did some work with our architect, and
just above ground, or are we talking?
Yes, just above ground. But from his experience, he was confident that we were able to build close to the tree, I think several meters distant from the tree, and we have had special foundations, as you're probably aware, with piles and with concrete raft to make sure that we are protected from the effects of the tree root. I'm confident at seeing the concrete that was laid that we'll survive.
We often hear that a house, really, a lot of it is to do with the constraints that you face, that it forms. So could you have had a very different house on this plot, or really, because this was such a massive constraint?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, the tree led to perhaps one of the nicest features of the house, which is that we are curved. And the curve is really special to us. Now, if the tree wasn't there, we would have had a straight, I'm sure, a conventional box. And that's something we would not really have welcomed. So although it's a constraint in one way, it's given us a lovely shaped house. And I think we feel as though the curve of the inner curve is embracing and welcoming, and it's terrific.
In terms of the brief itself and what you gave to Chris, what was on there?
We wanted a 2-bedroomed bungalow. We wanted ensuite facilities. We wanted an open plan kitchen diner. We acknowledged it was going to be small, but we wanted a small bungalow too that we could manage in our old age. those were the factors that we were really giving him. And then he built his plan around that brief and did so extraordinarily well.
And I like the way that you've said to me before that actually you just let him go ahead and do it. So why that approach?
Well, I suppose we were naive, maybe. I don't know, but
it's a good approach. I like it. Some people can't do that. They need to, more input.
Well, right from the very beginning, and I'm serious, from the very early meetings, he was sketching away with curved buildings, with exciting open plan approaches and big windows and all the things that we found very exciting and were just wonderful. So we were really happy with what he was coming up with. I don't think we ever said, no, we don't want that, or this is not suitable. I think he had the imagination to support us and to help us.
You saw Chris do this tour. Was there some connection there at that point? You could have said, all right, go and do a passive house and go to another architect. But was there also a connection made at that point?
Well, there's a geographical one in that his office is a quarter of a mile away.
Okay, handy.
And I've known Chris for a long time.
Oh, okay, all right.
So he seemed to me to embody the passive house spirit, and we just didn't see the need to go anywhere else and try and search for a passive house architect.
All right, then. So we've decided on the plans now, and we've got the plot. That's all fairly easy. What happens next in terms of getting the team together and making this happen?
Well, the specification went out to 5 local builders, and what was very pleasing for me, and this is the first time I've ever done this, was that 2 of those builders said they wanted to meet us on the plot to discuss what they were going to do and how they were going to work and what their modus was, their method of working. The team that we eventually got were very impressive in that the builder came with their bricklayer, their carpenter, their plumber, and their electrician. And it was very apparent very quickly that they were on board with the passive house project. They wanted to do a passive house too. And they shared our vision and Chris's vision as well. So that was very important. And I suppose it's very important to say their tender was a very acceptable one.
In terms of the prices that you had before you, I don't know, maybe I should ask this in a different way. What made you go for them? Was it price? Was it something else, just a gut feeling? Well,
it was a combination of both. They were, I think, 60% lower than one of the prices. But they had convinced us that they were working as a team. They were not subcontracting. They were actually a company that worked together. And that was absolutely correct. We found that right through the project, right through the build, that it was the same carpenter, it was the same bricklayers that were working here, not subcontractors who came in and didn't have a care really for what they were doing. And their attention to detail in things like the cavity wall and stuff was just superb, absolutely wonderful.
At what stage did you leave your old house? I'm assuming you might have needed the money for the project, or?
Yes, we were not brave enough to start the build and then try and sell. So we sold first. We sold very quickly, and that was a bit of a dilemma. So we then moved into a village a few miles away to rented accommodation. And that was quite good in a way because we were not totally on top of the project, which could, I think, be daunting for the builders, although we were regular visitors. And we were always made welcome too, so that was very good. And it's for people at our age and doing this for the first time, it's very exciting to see the developments week by week.
And when you sold your old house, do you have to make them aware that there's a project about to take place, or does it really doesn't matter?
Well, we actually said to the people who came and had a look around that they were looking at the house, our old house, in terms of wanting to buy it, and we were looking at them just to make sure that they were going to be good neighbours. So there was an element of seriousness about that. There were some people we perhaps might not have sold to.
It's a different situation, isn't it? No, I can understand you entirely.
And we did have to put into the deeds the fact that a covenant to say that they couldn't put up a 2-story building in front of our fence in order, which would have blocked out the sunlight on the southern boundary. So we had to consider things like that as well.
So let's go back to the rental property. When you came to site, were you checking anything or really just thinking, oh, it's moved on?
Well, sometimes we would be invited to check things, and other times we would come for a routine monthly meeting, progress meeting, to see how things were going, and meet with the architect or his agent and the builder to see how things were on schedule, that sort of thing. But generally, we would be coming just to have a look and see how things were developing. And of course, we've lived here for 30 years. Friends were also very interested to come and see how our new house was going. So we sometimes came accompanied by friends and relatives.
How long did it take to complete the build?
They started at the end of January and we moved in on the 13th of August. So it was very efficient and exactly in line with their projected.
Is that a big benefit of going with a contractor, just knowing that almost that they've said they're going to do this, they're a team, so they've done it before? I know they hadn't done Passive House before.
It didn't worry me that they hadn't done Passive House, because one of the things they said right from the beginning I think it was in the contract, was that they wanted to go on the Passive House tradesman's course, and they wanted the Passive House Trust to organise some courses at their headquarters in Norfolk for other tradesmen. So we could see that they were really concerned to do it right, to do it properly. So that was good. In terms of timescale, we never had any real worries, but obviously you are at risk of the weather, and that can hold things up and delay you. But fortunately, we had a good dry-ish 6 months.
What were the tough decisions that you had to make throughout this? We are not immensely wealthy people, I have to say. And we were making decisions often on a financial basis. So that some of the things we've got in the house are not top of the range. Others are, but not everything. So we had decisions to make about kitchen units and bathrooms and suites and things of that nature. I wouldn't say they were really tough, but they were the more pressing. They come at you, lots of them, don't they?
They do, yes, and you've got to decide. And one or two things we've got, which probably we didn't really need. We've got a nice light that lights up the lime tree in the dark. And but generally speaking, no, we didn't have massively difficult decisions. We made some compromises, and that wasn't too difficult.
Is there anything else I need to know about the build? It sounds like it was pretty easy.
Well, I think it was really. If it wasn't, we didn't know about it. So that's always a good thing, isn't it? But we've been in several months now, and everything's working very well. We're very comfortable in the house. It meets all the requirements that we have, and there were no exaggerated claims about the comfort of a passive house. So, yeah, we're very happy.
And what about looking at those plans when they're just on a piece of paper or on a computer? Is it what you thought you were getting?
It's difficult because we're not used to seeing that kind of work all the time. We're not familiar with it. But you get a vision when you look at them. I was a geography teacher, so I'm used to working with plans and maps. But it's getting the 3D factor. And, of course, you can now sort of go through, I don't know what the technical term is, but 3D models of your house beforehand. It's obviously nicer when it's done, and when you actually walk in and you realise just how nice the sloping roof is or how nice the curve is. But, that wasn't a major problem.
And I suppose one aspect of a curve is that you have a fair bit of corridor space, but because this is a smaller house, maybe you don't really. It's not that long, is it?
No, it is a concern. And right from the beginning, we were worried about that, because you go along some soulless corridors in some bungalows and you think, oh, gosh, this is grim. And they're dark and gloomy and not welcoming. But this is elegant. It has a beautiful shape to it. I think we've got the colour right as well. The painter was gave us a number of options, and I think it fits nicely. This not quite white, but an off-white, and it leads you into the living end of the house and encourages you to explore. So I think it's actually a bonus almost. And the open plan where my study is, it draws you to it as well. So yeah, we're pleased with that. The interesting thing is people said, of course, living in a curved house, you'd have a curved television. Sadly, the curve is in the wrong direction.
Well, talk about that curve for a second, because I mean, how have they managed to achieve that? You don't notice it. It's very subtle, isn't it? But I've seen an ICF one. How have we got it, and how does it vary according to where it is in the house?
Some parts of it disappear with familiarity. The corridor never does. It's always a conscious situation that you're aware of it, and I like it. Inside the house, in the room, sometimes you're no longer almost aware of that curve. And then suddenly the lights on the wall or the elegant lights that we've got, the downlights, just draw your attention to it. And it's terrific. How they actually do it, how they actually build it, I know the curve was plotted using GPS facilities, and the bricklayers broke down those units into ever smaller and smaller sections, so that the bricks they were laying were no more than perhaps 2 or 3 before they took another check and another alignment on the curve. I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job. It's so elegant, particularly on the outside.
When the house was completed and handed over, what did you still have left? I mean, did you have a plan for landscaping, and were there other things that you then needed to do once you moved in? Yes,
there was no landscaping. The whole garden was non-existent. So we set about to do that fairly soon, particularly levelling and sorting it out. So we put down some turf pretty quickly. And of course, that's in a curve too. And I think that just draws your eye around the house.
It's not have another look, I think.
It's not a large plot. And one of the things we were concerned about is whether the house would be too big for the plot, whether it would dominate. But we're confident now. I think the total plot is 500 square metres and the house is 110. So there is still quite a lot of space. And that's enough for us. For our gardening needs. Perhaps I'd like a little bit more for my vegetables, but it's fine. So that was work to be done, but it was the kind of thing we just loved to do anyway. And in the late summer, early autumn, we spent some very happy times there preparing the plot. There's a lot to do, and we haven't got the planting right yet, but we enjoy doing that kind of work, so we're quite happy to take our time.
As we sit here, we are looking at your old house, and it's just an interesting juxtaposition. So I think this is my final question. What does it feel like moving from there to here, but sort of still seeing there?
It's been surprisingly easy. I thought we were in the old house for 32 years, and I thought we would feel a wrench leaving it. I personally didn't. I thought it was time to go. Now we're looking at it. We hear the children playing in the garden. The people in it I think, have the same care for it that we had. I actually find it very pleasant, really, and no great difficulties. It might have been different if they were allowing it to fall into disrepair or, not looking after it, but they don't seem to be of that nature. And so, yeah, it's great. It's good.
Well, Rob, I really enjoyed having a look around the house. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming, and we've enjoyed your company too.
Head online to take a look at the show notes that accompany today's session at houseplanninghelp.com/131. You can review the key points. We've got some photos from the construction through to completion. And of course, the video that I made there, once that goes live after the awards, then we'll embed that too. We'll also link you across to the UK Passive House Awards, the shortlist there, so you can see exactly who's in the running. This is perfect for us, isn't it? They tend to change the theme of the UK Passive House Awards, so it's all about self-builders this year. houseplanninghelp.com/131. Just about done. However, I would love you to be part of the hub Oh, what is the Hub, I hear you ask? Well, let me tell you. It's basically aimed at you if you're someone who is self-building. You're building from scratch. Maybe you're a beginner. You could even be underway. The idea is this is going to develop over time. I really think that there is not a resource out there, a community that gives you that support all the way through. And that is what we are hoping to be, to turn ourselves into that. At the moment, what we're offering, we've got the in-depth video case study that we have of Long Barrow, and we'll be adding to these case studies. So this is the entire way through the construction and just trying to understand some of the decisions that are being made. So hopefully we can make our own decisions and they'll get better and stronger from more knowledge that we pick up from these. We've also got the monthly modules, which focus on various topics and try to be very step-by-step and actionable. And the community, which is really important too. As I mentioned, it's quite difficult just to bump into self-builders. You might do it at a trade show, but it might be awkward. Here, this is just a very natural way to network with other people who'll be doing different projects, but probably have a lot of information that might be useful to you too. So that's the vision. Keep on honing it, keep on adding material, even removing material, just making it work better so that what is essentially very complex becomes easier to get through. That's where I'm aiming. Membership is currently very reasonable at £99 for the whole year, and you can find out exactly what that entails at houseplanninghelp.com/join. That's me, finished for another episode. Fantastic to have you there. Thank you so much. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.